are very much influenced by the writings of Zecharia Sitchin.
That's correct.
Who was a historian, a translator of ancient Sumerian texts. Sitchin takes these texts literally, doesn't he?
He does, yes. He's one of 200 Sumerian scholars in the world that can pick up a clay tablet and read it like you and I can read a newspaper. I have a great deal of respect for the integrity and the scope of his work. And basically what Sitchin is agreeing with all of the other archaeological positions. He says, yes, it is true that the ancient Sumerian civilization was a sudden civilization. There were no predecessors. They did have all of the institutions that we have now, including limited forms of democratic government, medicine, trilingual dictionaries, schools, universities, and so on. It is very difficult, it's almost a new part. You know, how do you explain a sudden civilization in that sense with no predecessors? But over and above that, he also would go one step farther. Instead of saying, as traditionally we have in the academic world, that the gods were mythological, because of the things they could do, you know, fly through space, fly through the atmosphere, create human beings, use weapons like starboard lasers and so on. He says we have to look at the technology we have today and see that we can do all those things. Those reasons are vaporized. So we must take at least another look. And when we look at the texts that have developed over the last 150 years from the archaeological digs, it is quite clear to him, and I have tried 7 or 8 years to break his case, so to speak, that he is saying very accurately what the truth is. And that is that those gods came from off-planet, outer space, from another planet in our solar system, a 10th one, which the evidence for which we can examine in a minute. We're here for taking huge amounts of gold out of the planet, not for wealth or jewelry, but to do some kind of special molecular seeding of the atmosphere of their planet, perhaps as a heat shield or whatever, because it went so far out past our sun, that they created human beings 300,000 years ago when they had a rebellion in their gold mines. We even have, if the ancient records are correct, we even have the conversations that took place when their lower echelons laid down their tools, created a rebellion and a work strike in their gold mines in South Africa, and forced their geneticists to create a creature to take their place. This is, I will put the other caveat down here, it is the most unthinkable thought in Western culture. But I believe that it is literally true. And we have the keys to restoring our true history to ourselves.
Now, these stories are written in clay tablets that have been found in the ruins in the area that's now Iraq, primarily the ancient kingdoms of Sumeria and Babylonia and Akkadian and Chaldea and so on. The clay tablets were probably created 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, and you're claiming that the events described in these clay tablets date back hundreds of thousands of years.
That's correct. And the reason I'm saying that is that it is also recorded in those tablets that the reason we have this information in the first place is that it was taught to us. That the gods first created us as a genetically engineered species by fusing, genetically splicing their genes with the only indigenous hominid around on the planet at that point, at the end point of our natural evolution at this planet, Homo erectus. Having done so and created a new bicameral species, if you will, with 2 major genetic codes, we were mutants and couldn't procreate. They eventually gave us the ability to procreate. We became precocious. Perhaps they, being, it appears from the ancient records, at a level of technology and in a level of technology that we have only reached now, that they perhaps didn't even know the full consequences of what that genetic engineering event would transpire, how it would transpire. And so we became precocious and intelligent more than probably they really wanted. They wanted a strong creature with enough intelligence to do their gold mining, but not to give them any problems, not to give them any trouble. But it turned out differently, and we became eventually partners with them. And in the process of being taught literally crash courses in civilization and given technology, we see that we were taught this stuff, and we were eventually taught to write it down. And since it was the most important event, since it bore on our actual genesis as a species, it has been recorded in all those societies, and it's basically a transcultural phenomenon.
In other words, if you were to look at the most ancient legends of Egypt, of Sumeria, of India, of South America, you would find certain parallels.
That's very true. It is Joseph Campbell, one of the most respected of our comparative mythologists in the Masks of God series. He spent 12 years in intense research on that, and he answered a question that he posed to himself at the very beginning of that work in a very startling way. He said, is all of this mythology, which seems so completely the same over the face of the planet, even the genealogies of the gods, who married whom and who was whose cousin, even though the languages were different because the languages used different names for them, they were the same whether it was in the Vedic traditions in India or in the Norse tradition in Norway. And he said, so the question must be posed, is it the common reaction of the human neurological system to, in a naive fashion, to the processes of nature, like thunder and lightning and so on? And he said, when I look at the history and I look at my material, it can't be that way. It was not that way. He said, something happened in Sumeria. I don't know exactly what it was, and he postulated, as with all establishment scholars up to his point, that the gods were mythological. But he said, it is quite obvious that something happened in Sumeria and it spread all over the world.